Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation in New York, where world leaders face a number of critical challenges at the annual United Nations General Assembly. Late Friday, the Pentagon announced the U.S. will deploy additional troops and military equipment to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, increasing security in the region after last week's attack on oil fields in Saudi Arabia. The Trump administration has placed blame for those attacks squarely on Iran and announced on Friday a new round of sanctions against Iran's national bank. President Trump has not ruled out military strikes, but it seems he is holding off on them for now. We begin this morning with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who called the oil field attacks an act of war. Mr. Secretary, good morning.
Well, it's good to be with you again.
You are the only U.S. official who has directly and definitively blamed every single part of these attacks on Iran. Is there any question that the attack was launched from Iran?
No reasonable person doubts precisely who conducted these strikes. And it is the intelligence community's determination that it is likely the case that these were launched from Iran. You've seen the pictures that came from the north. It was a sophisticated attack. These weapon systems had ranges that could not have come from the Houthis. It is crazy for anyone to assert that they did. I mean, it is literally nuts on its face to make an assertion that this was an attack by the Houthis. This was Iran, true, and the United States will respond in a way that reflects that act of war by this Iranian revolutionary regime.
It was launched from Iran.
This was an attack by Iran on the world. This was an act of war. I'm here at the UN.
Okay,
the UN's primary charter is to prevent state-on-state
Saudi Arabia hasn't either.
The UN's primary charter is to protect peace around the world. This was a state-on-state act of war.
Iran's foreign minister, as you may have heard, has repeatedly denied any part played by Iran in this attack. Will the U.S. release evidence that proves he's lying?
Well, we already have. There's already ample evidence that demonstrates that he's lied. You saw the Saudis showing these were Iranian systems built and manufactured inside of Iran.
We know
where they attacked.
Look,
I don't know why anybody listens to the Iranian foreign minister. He has nothing to do with Iranian foreign policy, and he's lied for decades. And then he resigned. It's not even worth responding to him. It's beneath the dignity of anyone in the world to listen to someone who repeatedly makes the claim that the Houthis launched this attack.
Saudi Arabia has showed itself incapable of defending its most prized asset. And it is America's best customer when it comes to buying American-made weapons. U.S. intelligence also didn't warn of this attack happening. Are you concerned about the stability of the kingdom, that they were this vulnerable?
Yeah, you don't have all your facts quite right. But you saw the announcement that the Secretary of Defense made on Friday. We're going to continue to reinforce. We're looking for a diplomatic resolution to this, unlike the Iranians, who apparently
part of the facts was wrong. Saudi Arabia was not able to defend itself.
Apparently the Iranians are bloodthirsty and looking for war. President Trump and I were looking for a diplomatic resolution to this.
What does that mean?
We had a nation-state attack, another nation-state, the largest attack on the global energy supply, I think, in all of recorded history. The good news, when I walked in here this morning, Brent cruised straight at $64 a barrel. And the world has responded in a way that has made sure that there's ample supply in the system. But make no mistake about it, we're prepared to do the things we need to do to try to deter Iran from this kind of behavior.
What does a diplomatic resolution mean? The attack happened.
Yeah. So the resolution looks like this. Iran becomes a normal nation. We laid out now a year ago in May.
These are your 12 steps.
No missile strikes, no capacity to build out their nuclear weapons program, broadly speaking. Stop the assassination campaign. They're killing people in Europe. They have an assassination campaign in Europe. This is not a normal nation, and we hope the Iranian people, who we think are demanding that their country stop this kind of behavior, act in a way that causes the Iranian regime's behavior to change. That's our mission set. It's what President Trump is determined to achieve, first and foremost through diplomatic means.
But the president hasn't laid those things out publicly as you just did.
He and I fully understand the mission set. I know it because he's told it to me.
If you look at just the things that have happened over the past few months, the U.S. has been very clear that it places blame for the shooting down of that American drone on Iran, the attack on the oil tanker in the UAE on Iran, this attack on Iran. It seems Iran's behavior is getting worse, not better, based on the Trump administration's campaign. You've been very aggressive with these sanctions. Why do you think sanctioning them leads to better behavior?
Margaret, you start the clock at the wrong point.
I'm talking about what happened this summer.
1979 is the trajectory of the Iranian Revolution. 40 years of terror. 40 years of terror. The previous administration chose to arm them, to provide the wealth and resources that have underwritten these very attacks that we're seeing today. They were able to build out these missile systems.
So you
they
think
were
the
able
Trump
to improve
administration policy
is
working, is what you're saying, despite the fact that these attacks are continuing to happen? Because Liz Cheney, Lindsey Graham, Republican allies of the president have said the failure to carry out some kind of obvious retaliation or military strike looks like weakness.
Yeah, we've responded in a number of ways. This is not about weakness. This strategy is working. We sanctioned the central bank on Friday. Mark, you have to remember, the sanctions that we put in place that ultimately will cause the Iranian regime to shrink by between 10 and 15% in the year ahead only went in place in May of this year. They're 5 months on. We're at the beginning of that sanctions campaign. But I don't think anyone should mistake President Trump for having the resolve to make sure we get this right. And when the moment calls for it, I am confident the president will take all appropriate actions.
But I guess fundamentally the question is, why do you think sanctions will be preventative and not just punitive? Why do you think making Iran more desperate will get them to act more responsible?
It'll deny them the resources to foment the exact kind of strikes that we have seen over this past summer. It will deny them the money, the wealth, the resources. They're operating today in 5 countries. It's expensive. They've already had to make difficult decisions about whether they're going to feed their people, provide medicine to their people, or they're going to launch missiles into Saudi Arabia. I am convinced that the Iranian people see those choices being made, and as time goes on, they will continue to see that those conditions worsen, and they'll demand that their leadership not bring their brothers and sisters back home in body bags, but rather use those resources. The Iranian people are great people. We stand with them, and I'm confident they will demand that their leadership behave in a way that reflects the great history of this place.
Are you considering cyber attacks? Would that be a less obvious, less direct form of retaliation?
The President talked about our use of those previously, but I'm certainly not going to forecast what we'll do as we move forward.
But suffice it to say, building up defensive presence and sanctions are not the limit of what the Trump administration will do?
Oh, goodness, no.
I want to also ask you about Ukraine. The president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, is publicly calling for an investigation by the Ukrainian government into Joe Biden, who is obviously a political opponent of the president. Is it appropriate for the president's personal attorney to be inserting himself in foreign affairs like this?
If there was election interference that took place by the vice president, I think the American people deserve to know. We know there was interference in the 2016 election, and if it's the case that there was something going on with the president or his family that caused a conflict of interest and Vice President Biden behaved in a way that was inconsistent with the way leaders ought to operate, I think the American people deserve to know that.
So you think it's appropriate for Rudy Giuliani to be doing that? Has the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine been providing support? The State Department been supporting what he's doing?
So I'm not going to talk about that other than to say this. We have consistently worked to support the Ukrainian people. I remember the previous administration. Margaret, you'll remember I was a member of Congress, and Barack Obama refused to provide defensive weapon systems to the Ukrainian people. He sent them blankets. This president, much to the consternation of Vladimir Putin, who, there's this storyline about Russia and we're weak on Russia. This president sent defensive weapon systems to the Ukrainians so they could defend themselves, while Barack Obama allowed 1/5 of Ukraine to be stolen by Vladimir Putin. This administration is working to develop a great relationship with Ukraine. We'll see President Zelensky this week here in New York, I think, and we're looking forward to that.
Will you ask him, or have you asked him, to open an investigation?
I've talked to the foreign minister now a couple of times. We talk about the important relationship between our two countries and how we can make Ukraine stronger and have great economic commerce between our two great nations.
Secretary Pompeo, you've got a very busy week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Secretary Pompeo's counterpart in Iran is Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. We spoke with him yesterday. You think it's posturing?
I think it's posturing. I think it's all going the wrong direction in addressing this issue.
The United States says there's no way this attack was launched from Yemen and that the Houthis don't even have the ability to do what happened.
Well, it is difficult for the United States to explain why its state-of-the-art equipment was not able to intercept these weapons. But the fact of the matter is that the Houthis have accepted responsibility for that. If it were a false flag operation, if somebody else did it, then they should look for that culprit. It wasn't Iran.
The United States, Saudi Arabia, they all say that the weapons, the evidence that they have and have gathered was made by Iran.
Well, they made all those claims in the past.
Those missiles can be reverse engineered to figure out where they were launched from.
Well, they can do it.
The U.S. says it's just a matter of time before other investigators determine that these came from Iran.
Let them do that, because it would take a miracle for them to claim that, because it didn't come from Iran. Period.
Saudi Arabia allowed in reporters to the oil facilities to look at the damage. And there's evidence the attacks came from the north, not from Yemen, from territories that would indicate Iran, possibly Iraq, but the United States says Iran.
Well, there is no evidence to that effect. The Saudis made a show, but they could not prove it. Now, at the end of the day, they claimed that the weapons were Iranian, but they couldn't show even that. They've been showing that a lot of lies.
Are you confident that the UN inspectors, that the French inspectors, that the other countries who are sending people on the ground to look at this equipment, that none of them will determine that Iran played a direct role here, or that these were fired from Iran?
I'm confident that Iran did not play a role. I'm confident that anybody who conducts an impartial investigation will reach that conclusion. But I cannot say a priori that the people who are being sent will conduct an impartial investigation, because we've had cases in the past where they did it.
So will you accept the results of the UN investigators?
No, we will accept the result of an impartial investigation.
Who's impartial?
We can create an impartial investigation team. We were not informed by the UN. We were not consulted by the UN. We do not know on what basis this has taken place. So we will take it up with the United Nations. We are confident that if the United Nations carries out an impartial investigation, the outcome will be that it was not launched from Iran.
Saudi Arabia said today that citizens from the region are being recruited by Iran to carry out attacks.
This means that
it
means that they are backtracking from the initial allegation that it's coming from Iran. They're saying that it may have come from somewhere else, but it was based on citizens being recruited by Iran to do this. So a lie falls apart sooner or later.
Can you say that these weren't Iranian-backed attacks in any way, shape, or form?
They were not Iranian-backed attacks. We support the Yemenis. And you see, Iran...
But you also support militias in Iraq and elsewhere.
No, we support the government of Iraq. These militias that you talk about are part of the Iraqi government.
Can you say these weren't launched from Iraq by an Iranian-backed group?
No, they were not launched from Iraq by an Iranian-backed group or by any group.
President Trump has said he'd be willing to meet with Iran without precondition. And there has been talk among the Western powers about trying to give some financial lifeline to Iran to stay in the nuclear deal. All of that was happening, and then this attack seemed to blow it all up.
No, all of that was not happening. Because
you didn't take the offer of talks as real?
We have been talking to the French. The United States has been reluctant to engage in what is required. Let me give you an example that President Trump would easily understand in transactional terms. In real estate terms. I buy a building from you, and somebody inherits your company from you next year, and he comes and tells me, I didn't sell that building to you. I need a higher price and a worse building. Would you buy it? Would anybody to use President Trump's word, in any history, buy this building? Do you have any example in any history, again, to use his wording, of anybody doing this? He is asking us. We didn't have a revolution in the United States. President Trump inherited a government from another administration that was legally elected as United States government. And this agreement has been endorsed by the Security Council. This agreement is in a Security Council resolution. Now, last I heard, the United States sits in the Security Council as a permanent member. It has not withdrawn. It withdrew from human rights, but hasn't withdrawn from the Security Council, at least not as of yet.
You said yourself that you were invited into the Oval Office to meet with President Trump.
Yeah, but to meet him for what? For a photo opportunity? Or to meet him for some substance?
So when the president says he's willing to meet and talk, you're not taking it seriously at all?
We're ready to talk. We're ready to talk, but talk in terms of something that is not going to be valid only for the next 1.5 years or 5.5 years. We need to talk about something that is permanent, that would last. We already have an agreement. We talked. I have talked to what was a United States Secretary of State and United States Secretary of Energy for hours upon hours of painful negotiations. These were difficult negotiations. It wasn't just a 2-page document that we signed so that we could do another 2-page document.
So you're saying you will not meet or talk or consider diplomatic negotiations with the United States unless the acceptance of that old deal, the JCPOA,
it's not an old
is agreed to.
It's a deal that exists now. There is a negotiating room. There is a negotiating table.
You will not meet with Secretary Pompeo outside of that?
No.
Why?
Because there's no reason to.
There's no reason to talk
and
to
basically, Secretary Pompeo is prevented by law from meeting me because they designated me.
U.S. officials told CBS News, though, that the Supreme Leader himself approved these attacks on Saudi Arabia, but that they needed to be deniable.
Well, this is just a hypocritical, hypothetical allegation. I mean, no reality whatsoever.
The Supreme Leader didn't approve these attacks?
These attacks did not take place from Iran for the Supreme Leader to approve them. Had they taken place from Iran, then he would have had to approve them, but it didn't take place from Iran.
Do you think U.S. officials are lying when they say that? That Saudi Arabia is lying?
I'm certain that they're being lied to. Whether they want to accept that lie, I think the work of us diplomats, I think myself and my counterpart, the U.S. Secretary of State, we need to try to push diplomacy, as Senator Sanders has recently said, not to push war.
Are you confident that you can avoid a war?
No. No, I'm not confident that we can avoid a war. I'm confident that we will not start one. But I'm confident that whoever starts one will not be the one who finishes it.
What does that mean?
That means that there won't be a limited war.
I'm told I'm out of time. There's plenty more to talk to you about, though. Thank you.
Good talking to you. You're tough.